I never thought my own flesh and blood would look me in the eyes and tell me to clean the bathroom like I was nothing more than hired help. After 45 years of sacrifice, of loving my daughter unconditionally, I found myself exiled to a trailer in my own backyard while they lived in the house my husband and I had built. They thought I was losing my mind, or at least that's what they told everyone. What they didn't know was that I had found the document they overlooked, the one piece of paper that would change everything. They had taken my home, my dignity, and even tried to steal my memories, but they made one fatal mistake. They assumed I was too weak, too confused, too old to fight back. As I stood in that house, clutching my worn purse with trembling hands while my daughter, son-in-law, and their real estate agent prepared to sell my home right out from under me, I knew it was time. Time to show them all that erasing a woman like me wouldn't be as easy as they thought. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or cast aside by the very people who should have protected you, this story will break your heart before putting it back together again. Follow this channel for more true stories of betrayal, justice, and the unbreakable spirit of those who refuse to be forgotten. Like and comment below telling us where you're watching from, and share with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to reclaim what's rightfully yours. I can't pinpoint exactly when I stopped existing to my daughter. Maybe it was the day my husband died, or perhaps it was before that, when I ceased being useful to her. I lived in a modest little house on the outskirts of Fresno, where we raised our 2 daughters. When he passed away, all that remained was loneliness and doubt. The words she used that day still echo in my head. "Mom, let's transfer the house to my name. It's safer that way. What if you forget something important, you know?" I didn't want to believe she was referring to my head, my memory, but I signed. I signed with a trembling hand and with fear. It wasn't long before the forgetting began. Neighbors' names, pots on the stove, days of the week, and like an old animal, I was put out of my own home, now with her signature on the contract. They gave me an old trailer in the backyard and said it was for my own good. I never walked through the front door again. Sometimes I'd watch my granddaughter playing in the garden and hide behind the curtain, like someone spying on a life that was no longer theirs. The first time I truly understood what was happening was when I overheard my son-in-law talking on the phone about the old lady problem. That problem was me, the woman who had once cooked Sunday dinners for 18 people, who had worked 2 jobs to put my daughters through college, who had nursed my husband through cancer for 3 years without a single complaint. Now I was just the problem, living in their backyard. My younger daughter, Melissa, lives in Oregon. She calls sometimes, but she believes whatever story her sister tells her. Mom just needs supervision, they say, as if 68 years of living, of surviving, of raising them counted for nothing now. I've started to wonder if I really am losing my mind, the way they whisper when I enter the room. Last Christmas, I walked up to the main house uninvited. I'd baked my special cinnamon rolls, the ones my granddaughter Lily used to beg for. The housekeeper they'd hired, a stern woman named Verna, opened the door and looked me up and down like I was a homeless person who had wandered in from the street. "Back entrance is for deliveries," she said, pointing to the side of the house. My own daughter didn't correct her. She just looked embarrassed, taking the cinnamon rolls and thanking me as if I were a stranger dropping off a package. I remember walking back to my trailer that day, the weight of invisibility pressing down on my shoulders. I sat in the dark and cried for hours, wondering how the girl who once crawled into my bed during thunderstorms could now look through me as if I were already a ghost. Until one day, when everything changed, a plain brown envelope left at my trailer door. Inside was a document, a mistake, their mistake, and a name, my name, still there. That was the moment my memory came rushing back like an avalanche, and with it, the plan. You see, my husband wasn't just a kind man with calloused hands who worked at the lumber mill for 40 years. He was smart, cautious. When Rebecca, my eldest, first suggested putting the house in her name for safekeeping, he had insisted on a clause, a small thing, a protection I'd forgotten about until I saw that paper. That night, I sat under the single light bulb in my trailer, Reading those words over and over, my hands didn't shake anymore. My mind wasn't foggy. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something new stirring inside me. Not forgiveness, not sadness, justice. I carefully folded the document and placed it in my purse. The same purse Rebecca had bought me for my birthday 5 years ago, saying, "This is more your style, Mom. Less old lady-ish." I looked around the trailer, at the leaking roof, the space heater that barely worked, the twin bed where I now slept alone while they lived in my 4-bedroom house. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, I would remind them who I was, who I've always been, the mother they thought they could erase. I spent the entire night studying that envelope's contents, my reading glasses perched on the tip of my nose, squinting under the harsh light of my trailer's only working lamp. My fingers traced over the legal jargon, words I once would have skipped over, trusting that the people who loved me would protect my interests. How naive I had been. It was the contract transferring my home, to Rebecca's name. But there, on page 4, section 12B, was something they had overlooked, the reversion clause. It required a co-signer, a guarantor who would certify that I was making this decision of sound mind and without coercion. That signature was missing. The transfer was technically invalid if I could prove I had been pressured or manipulated. They made a mistake, I whispered to myself, my voice sounding stronger than it had in years. They thought I was too far gone to notice, but there was something else inside that envelope that made my blood run cold. A bank receipt showing a suspicious transaction in my son-in-law Mark's name, a loan, a substantial one, using my house, the house that wasn't legally theirs, as collateral. The date on the receipt was just 3 weeks ago. No wonder they'd been showing the house to real estate agents. They weren't just trying to sell my home, they were trying to cover up their fraud before anyone discovered it. I sat back in my threadbare armchair, the one I'd salvaged when they cleared out the main house and replaced all my furniture with their modern pieces. My husband James would have been furious. He'd worked so hard for this place, carrying the memory of his own parents' eviction during the recession of the 1970s. "No one will ever take our home," he used to say. "I've made sure of it." And apparently he had. Even from the grave, he was still protecting me. The next morning, I put on my best blouse, the lavender one with pearl buttons that James had given me for our 40th anniversary. I brushed my silver hair carefully and applied a touch of lipstick. I needed to look put together, capable, not like the confused old woman they portrayed me as whenever company came over. "She gets so mixed up these days," Rebecca would say, patting my hand condescendingly. "We have to watch her all the time." I waited until they had all left for the day, Rebecca to her real estate office, Mark to his investment firm, and Lily to high school, before walking the 6 blocks to Johnson Street. My knees ached with each step, but I refused to take the community shuttle they'd insisted I use for my safety. I needed to prove, if only to myself, that I could still navigate this town I'd lived in for 4 decades. Edward Simmons still lived in the same craftsman house with the blue shutters, 3 doors down from the Presbyterian church. He had been James's friend since they played high school football together, and later, when Ed became an attorney, he handled all our legal matters. I hadn't seen him since James's funeral, where he'd squeezed my hand and whispered, "Anything you need, Margaret. Anything at all." I'd been too deep in grief to take him up on that offer. Until now, when he opened the door, his eyes widened in surprise. "Margaret, my God, it's been 3 years," I finished for him. "I'm sorry to just show up like this, Ed." He ushered me inside, into a living room cluttered with law books and framed photographs. I noticed one of him and James on a fishing trip, both of them sunburned and grinning while holding up a large trout. "I've been wondering about you," he said, offering me a seat. "I drove by the house a few times, but Rebecca always said you were resting or at appointments." "I've been living in a trailer in the backyard," I said quietly. "They moved me out there after they put the house in Rebecca's name." His bushy eyebrows shot up. "They did what?" I placed the documents on his coffee table. "And now they're trying to sell it. But I found these." Ed put on his reading glasses and examined the papers carefully. His expression darkened as he flipped through them. When he looked up, there was a fire in his eyes I hadn't seen since James was alive. "Finally you came," he said. "I've been waiting, hoping you would." "You knew?" My voice cracked. "I suspected. When Rebecca stopped bringing you to community events, when you suddenly couldn't attend church anymore." He shook his head. "James made me promise to look out for you. I failed him until now. We both have," I admitted, "but not anymore." Ed leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper despite us being alone. "Listen carefully, Margaret. We need to be strategic. They think you're helpless, and that's our advantage. For now, let them keep thinking that." I nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "What do we do first?" "We document everything, and we wait for them to make their next move." Ed's smile reminded me of James when he was plotting a surprise. "They forgot one crucial thing about you, Margaret." "What's that?" "That you were never just James's wife. You were his partner, and he always said you were the smarter one." For the first time in years, I felt a smile, a real one, spread across my face. They had underestimated me. They had forgotten who I was before I became just an inconvenient old woman in their backyard. But they were about to remember. For 2 weeks, I stayed away from the main house, observing from a distance like a general surveying a battlefield. Ed had advised me to maintain my routine, to appear docile and confused while we gathered evidence. So I shuffled to the mailbox at the same time each day, nodded vacantly when Rebecca or Mark acknowledged me from across the yard, and kept my newfound clarity hidden behind a veil of fabricated senility. From my trailer window, I could see most of the backyard and part of the kitchen through the large bay windows James had installed for me on our 25th anniversary. "So you can watch the birds while you bake," he'd said. Now those windows gave me a perfect vantage point into their lives they thought I was too addled to comprehend. On Wednesday morning, I watched a silver-haired man in an expensive suit walk the perimeter of my property with Rebecca and Mark. He carried a leather portfolio and kept nodding as Mark gestured expansively towards the old oak tree, the one James and I had planted when we first moved in. The man scribbled notes and pulled out what looked like a measuring tape. A real estate agent, undoubtedly. They were moving forward with the sale. Later that afternoon, I saw Verna, the housekeeper, scrubbing the outdoor furniture with unusual vigor. She was preparing for something. When she turned to grab more cleaning supplies, I caught her expression, a mix of disdain and satisfaction that made my stomach turn. I remembered the Christmas morning when she'd opened the door and looked at me as if I were a stray dog that had wandered onto their pristine porch. "Deliveries go around back," she'd said, her voice laced with superiority. Rebecca, standing behind her, had said nothing, just taken my homemade cinnamon rolls with an embarrassed smile and quickly closed the door. That night I called Ed from the ancient rotary phone they'd left in my trailer, perhaps thinking I couldn't manage anything more modern. "They had a realtor over today," I whispered, though there was no one to hear me in my tiny metal box of a home. "I expected as much," Ed replied. "I've been doing some digging. The bank is Coastal Federal. Mark took out a loan for $175,000 against the property 3 weeks ago." I gasped. "What on earth for?" "Not sure yet, but I have a friend at the bank. He can't give me details, but he did mention that Mark's investment firm has been under financial stress. They've lost several major clients." The pieces began to fit together in my mind. Mark had always lived beyond his means, the luxury car, the golf club membership, the expensive watches. Rebecca had adopted his taste for the finer things, replacing my hand-sewn curtains with designer drapes, my functional kitchen with gleaming appliances I wasn't allowed to touch. "They're selling because they need the money," I realized aloud. "Looks that way. And they need to do it quickly, before anyone realizes the loan they took out was fraudulent." The next morning, I sat on my small patch of concrete that served as a porch, pretending to doze in the sunshine. I watched Lily, my granddaughter, walk from the school bus to the house. She was 16 now, with Rebecca's sharp features and James's warm brown eyes. Once, she'd been my little star, following me around the kitchen, begging for stories about when her mother was young. Now, She passed within 10 feet of me without a glance, her eyes fixed on the phone in her hand, earbuds blocking out the world, blocking out me. "Lily," I called softly, testing the waters. She startled as if a garden statue had suddenly spoken. Pulling one earbud out, she looked at me with a mixture of obligation and discomfort. "Oh, hi, Grandma. How was school, sweetheart?" She shrugged, already backing toward the house. "Fine, I gotta go. Homework." "Of course," I smiled, keeping my voice gentle, slightly vacant. "You always were such a good student." Something flickered across her face. A memory, perhaps, of afternoons spent at my kitchen table, me helping her with multiplication tables while chocolate chip cookies baked in the oven, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Yeah, see you." She hurried inside, the back door closing with a definitive click. I waited until she was gone before letting my smile fade. There had been a time when that child had known me, really known me, when she'd run to me with scraped knees and broken toys and secrets she couldn't tell her mother. When had I become a stranger to her? Had they told her I was losing my mind? Or had she simply learned by example to look through me rather than at me? Friday morning brought the sounds of increased activity from the main house. Through my window, I watched a parade of people coming and going. The real estate agent again, a photographer with professional equipment, a woman with fabric swatches who I assumed was a stager. They were preparing to list the house, my house, for sale. I called Ed again. "They're moving faster than we expected." "Then so will we," he replied. I filed the preliminary paperwork. The bank has been notified that there's a question about the property title. They can't complete any sale until it's resolved. Will that be enough to stop them? For now. But Margaret, his voice grew serious. You need to be prepared. When they realize what's happening, things might get ugly. I looked around my trailer, at the few possessions I'd been allowed to keep, at the single framed photo of James and me on our wedding day. I thought of the house where we'd raised our daughters, where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases, where James had taken his last breath, holding my hand. I thought of Rebecca's cold eyes when she told me the trailer would be easier for me to manage. "I'm counting on it," I said. The invitation came unexpectedly on a Saturday morning. Rebecca knocked on my trailer door, something she hadn't done in months. Usually, she just shouted from outside or sent Verna to relay messages. But there she was, wearing her pearl earrings and the forced smile she used with difficult clients at her real estate office. "Mom," she said, her voice honey-sweet in a way that immediately put me on guard. "We're having a family lunch tomorrow. The whole family. We'd love for you to join us." My heart gave a traitorous leap of hope before my newfound clarity tamped it down. This wasn't reconciliation. This was strategy. "Oh, what's the occasion?" I asked, making sure my voice quavered slightly. "Just family time," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's been too long. Lily was just saying how much she misses your stories." Lie. Lily barely acknowledged my existence anymore. "That sounds lovely, dear," I replied, playing the role of the grateful, foggy-minded mother. "What time shall I come up?" 1 o'clock. "And Mom?" Her eyes flickered over my faded house dress. "Maybe wear something nice? That blue dress I bought you last year. Melissa and her husband are driving down from Oregon, both my daughters in the same room." This was serious indeed. After she left, I called Ed from my ancient rotary phone. "They've invited me to Sunday lunch. The whole family will be there. They've probably received the bank notification," Ed said. "They'll try to get you to sign something. Don't eat or drink anything they give you until you've seen me touch it first. You think they'd not poison you, no, but a sleeping pill in your tea or an extra dose in your food to make you seem confused? I wouldn't put it past them at this point." The next day, I dressed carefully in the blue dress Rebecca had mentioned, a matronly thing with a Peter Pan collar that made me look like a child's idea of a grandmother. I added my own touch, the delicate gold locket James had given me on our first anniversary, containing a tiny photo of us from when we were young and luminous with possibility. I needed that reminder of who I had been, who I still was, beneath the invisible cloak of age they'd wrapped around me. I took extra care with my appearance. applying a light touch of makeup and styling my silver hair instead of pulling it back in my usual simple bun. Looking in the small, cloudy mirror of my trailer bathroom, I saw flashes of the woman I used to be, the woman who had organized community fundraisers, who had taught Sunday school for 20 years, who had stood up to the school board when they tried to cut the music program Rebecca loved so much. At precisely 1 o'clock, I made my way up the stone path to the back door. I knew better than to presume I could use the front entrance, but to my surprise, Mark opened the front door as I approached. "Margaret, come in, come in," he boomed with artificial joviality. "We're all waiting for you." The house, my house, had been transformed. Fresh flowers in crystal vases I didn't recognize. New artwork on the walls where James's fishing photos once hung. The dining room table extended to its full length, set with the good china I hadn't seen since Rebecca took possession of the house. The china my mother had passed down to me. Everyone was there. Rebecca looking tense despite her smile. Mark playing the generous host in a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Melissa and her husband Tom, who gave me awkward hugs. And Lily, my granddaughter, who glanced up from her phone just long enough to mumble, "Hi, Grandma," before returning to her screen. And in the corner, wearing a uniform I'd never seen her in before, stood Verna, looking uncharacteristically servile. "Sit, Mom, sit," Rebecca urged, guiding me to a small stool at the corner of the table, while everyone else had proper dining chairs. "Verna has prepared a beautiful meal. All your favorites," Mark added, though nothing on the table resembled anything I would have chosen. I smiled vacantly and allowed myself to be seated in the least comfortable spot, where the late afternoon sun would soon be shining directly in my eyes. A strategic placement, no doubt. The conversation flowed around me, studiously light. Melissa's new job, Tom's golf handicap, Lily's college prospects. No one addressed me directly except to occasionally ask if I was doing all right or if I needed anything, as if I were a patient rather than a family member. Verna moved efficiently around the table, serving everyone with practiced precision, everyone except me. "The salmon looks lovely," I remarked, when my plate remained empty long after others had begun eating. "Oh!" Rebecca exclaimed with exaggerated surprise. "Verna, Mother hasn't been served." Verna's lips tightened. I thought Mrs. Peterson preferred to serve herself these days. She's always complaining about how I do things. It was a lie. I rarely spoke to Verna at all, but it painted me as difficult, demanding. I saw Rebecca and Mark exchange a meaningful glance. "I can manage," I said softly, reaching for the serving dishes that had been placed just beyond my easy reach. "See," Rebecca said to the table at large, "this is what I mean. Mom insists on independence, but then struggles with basic tasks." I deliberately fumbled with the serving spoon, playing into their narrative while rage burned quietly inside me. As the meal progressed, I noticed a thick manila folder on the sideboard, official-looking papers peeking out. Near it sat a single pin in what looked like an expensive presentation box, the kind used for significant signings. "More wine, Margaret?" Mark offered, reaching for my glass. "Just water for me," I replied, covering my glass with my hand. "My medication, you know." Of course," he said, though I could see disappointment flash in his eyes. They wanted me pliant, perhaps slightly intoxicated. After the main course, while Verna cleared plates, Rebecca cleared her throat. "So, Mom, we have something important to discuss with you." Here it was. "We've been thinking about your situation," she continued, her voice taking on the slow, exaggerated cadence people use with small children and the very elderly. "This property is just too large for our family to maintain properly, and the market is excellent right now," Mark added smoothly. "We've had an offer, a very generous offer to sell." "Sell?" I echoed, widening my eyes in pretend confusion. "Yes, Mom," Melissa chimed in, clearly rehearsed. "It makes sense for everyone. Rebecca and Mark can buy something more suitable for their needs, and you, well, you'd be much happier in a proper senior living facility." "The Pines has an opening," Rebecca said brightly. "It's that nice place we drove past last month, remember? With the garden." I remembered. A sterile complex on the edge of town, as far from my friends and church as they could possibly place me without leaving the city limits entirely. I see, I said quietly. And what about my home? My trailer? An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Well, Mom, Rebecca finally said, that's the thing. The buyers want the entire property. Clean slate, you know? But don't worry. We'll make sure all your things are packed up properly before the move. I looked around the table at these strangers who shared my blood, who were calmly discussing erasing the last physical evidence of my existence in this world, the last place that held memories of James and our life together. And when would this happen? I asked, keeping my voice tremulous. Mark jumped in eagerly. That's the exciting part. They're ready to close quickly. We just need to sign the final paperwork. He gestured to the folder on the sideboard. We can do it today, in fact, and then you don't have to worry about a thing. We'll handle everything. Everything, I repeated softly. How thoughtful. I dabbed at my mouth with my napkin, giving myself a moment to compose my features. Then I folded it carefully and placed it beside my half-eaten meal. I think I need some air, I said, rising slowly from the uncomfortable stool. It's all quite overwhelming. Of course, Mom, Rebecca said, relief evident in her voice. They thought I was acquiescing. Take your time. The paperwork isn't going anywhere. But as I walked toward the door, I noticed what they hadn't bothered to hide. A bank notification letter on the counter, its red urgent stamp clearly visible. No, the paperwork wasn't going anywhere, and neither was I, at least not in the direction they expected. 3 days passed after that dreadful Sunday lunch. 3 days of calculated silence from my end. I could see them growing anxious, Rebecca pacing in the kitchen, visible through my trailer window. Mark making hushed phone calls in the backyard. Even Melissa delaying her return to Oregon. They were waiting for me to cave, to sign their papers, to disappear conveniently into the pines where I could be forgotten entirely. But I was done being forgotten. On Wednesday morning, Ed called me with news. The bank has issued a formal investigation notice. They've frozen any potential sale of the property pending resolution of the ownership dispute. What does that mean for us? I asked, my heart hammering in my chest. It means they're cornered. They'll either have to come clean about what they've done, or they'll try something desperate. He paused. Margaret, my contact at the bank says the final inspection for the sale is scheduled for today. The potential buyers are coming at 3 p.m. I glanced at my small clock. It was just past noon. They didn't tell me, I said, though I wasn't surprised. They're probably planning to keep you away somehow. Or perhaps... His voice trailed off. Perhaps what? Perhaps they're hoping you'll play into their narrative. If you appear confused, disoriented, then I'll confirm everything they've been saying about me, I finished for him. That I'm not competent to make decisions about my own home. Exactly. I looked out my window at the house. My house, gleaming in the afternoon sun. The lawn freshly mowed, the hedges trimmed. Everything perfect for the buyers who thought they were purchasing a piece of prime Fresno real estate, not knowing it was soaked in betrayal. I'll be ready, I told Ed. But I need you to be ready too. I spent the next hour preparing carefully. I chose the shabbiest clothes I owned. A faded house dress with a small tear at the hem, worn slippers, a cardigan with missing buttons. I mussed my hair slightly and removed all makeup. Then I tucked the original property documents and bank notices into my oldest, most battered purse, the one with fraying handles and a broken clasp that Rebecca had tried to throw away years ago. Looking in the mirror, I saw exactly what they wanted the world to see. A fragile old woman, slightly disheveled, someone to be pitied or, worse, dismissed, someone who needed others to make decisions for her. Perfect. At 2:45 p.m., I made my way slowly towards the main house. As expected, the driveway held unfamiliar cars. A sleek black Mercedes that must belong to the real estate agent, and a large SUV I hadn't seen before. The buyers had arrived early. I approached the back door, as I always did. Through the kitchen window, I could see Verna bustling about, arranging a tray of cookies and coffee. Rebecca stood in the living room, gesturing animatedly to a well-dressed couple, while Mark nodded and smiled beside her. Melissa was nowhere to be seen, probably sent to keep me occupied in my trailer. Too bad she'd knocked on an empty door. I waited until Verna stepped away from the door, then slipped inside quietly. No one noticed me at first. I moved slowly through the kitchen, taking in the freshly cut flowers, the bowl of polished apples, the staged perfection of it all. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a showcase, a fiction they were selling to strangers. When Verna turned and saw me, her eyes widened in alarm. She was wearing a black uniform with a white apron, something I'd never seen her in before, clearly dressed to impress the buyers with the image of a well-staffed household. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, moving to block my path. "Miss Rebecca said you weren't feeling well today." Another lie. I hadn't spoken to Rebecca in days. "I'm feeling much better now," I said, keeping my voice deliberately vague and slightly too loud. I wanted to see who was visiting my home. Verna's face hardened. "This isn't your house anymore, Mrs. Peterson. You need to go back to your trailer. Now." I knew that tone. It was the same one she'd used last Christmas and countless times since. The tone that said I was nothing, less than nothing, an inconvenience, a problem to be managed. But I stood my ground, clutching my old purse tighter. I heard voices. "Is Rebecca having a party?" Verna's eyes darted toward the living room where the conversation continued, unaware of my presence. She made a quick decision, grabbing a cleaning cloth from the counter. "You need to leave," she insisted, her voice low but forceful. "Or I'll have to tell Miss Rebecca you're confused again." When I didn't move, she thrust the cloth into my hands. "Fine. If you're going to be here, make yourself useful. The bathroom upstairs needs cleaning. That way," she pointed, as if I wouldn't know the layout of the home I'd lived in for 40 years. I took the cloth without argument and shuffled toward the stairs, playing the role they'd assigned me, docile, obedient, invisible. As I climbed the stairs slowly, I could hear Rebecca's voice floating up from below. "Completely renovated the kitchen 3 years ago. Top-of-the-line appliances." I paused on the landing, watching the scene unfold below. My daughter selling my home out from under me, the home where she'd taken her first steps, where James and I had nursed her through chickenpox and broken hearts, where we'd celebrated every birthday, every achievement, now just a commodity to be traded. I continued up to the second floor, passing Lily's room with its closed door plastered with band posters. At the end of the hall was the master bathroom, my bathroom, once. I pushed open the door and stood there, taking in the space. They'd remodeled this too. Gone was the cheerful yellow wallpaper James and I had picked out together. In its place, sleek gray tile and chrome fixtures. Sterile, impersonal, like a hotel room. I heard footsteps on the stairs, multiple sets. They were bringing the buyers up for a tour. "And up here we have 3 bedrooms, 2 full baths," came Rebecca's rehearsed spiel. "The master suite is particularly spacious." I stood in the doorway of the bathroom, cloth in hand, as they reached the top of the stairs. Rebecca saw me first, her practiced smile freezing on her face. "Mom, what are you—" "The girl told me to clean the bathroom," I said loudly, deliberately confused. "She said I needed to make myself useful." The well-dressed woman, the potential buyer, looked startled. Her husband frowned slightly. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said quickly, her voice strained with forced lightness. "This is my mother. She sometimes helps around the house." "Helps?" I echoed, letting bewilderment color my tone. "But this is my house. James and I bought it in 1978. An uncomfortable silence fell over the hallway. The real estate agent, who had been trailing behind, made a small, distressed sound. "Mom," Rebecca said through gritted teeth, still smiling, "why don't you go downstairs? Lily will be home from school soon." I looked at the prospective buyers with wide, innocent eyes. "Are you the new cleaning service? The girl downstairs wasn't very nice to me." The woman's expression softened with pity, exactly what I'd been aiming for. "No, ma'am. We're just looking at the house." "Oh, it's a lovely house," I said warmly. "My granddaughter said I need to clean the bathrooms now. She told me that this morning." Rebecca's face went pale. The script was falling apart in front of the buyers. "Perhaps we should continue the tour downstairs," the real estate agent suggested smoothly, trying to salvage the situation. As they turned to head back down, I followed behind, clutching my purse. The moment to reveal its contents hadn't arrived yet, but it would. Soon, I followed the uncomfortable procession back downstairs, my worn slippers making soft shuffling sounds against the hardwood floors James had installed himself, plank by plank, one summer 30 years ago. Rebecca kept throwing panicked glances over her shoulder at me, her perfectly manicured hands fluttering nervously at her sides. The potential buyers whispered to each other, their interest clearly dampened by my unexpected appearance. In the living room, I noticed Mark had been joined by a man in a crisp suit whom I recognized as Theodore Walsh, the family attorney who had replaced Ed after James died. On the coffee table lay a stack of documents, the final sale papers, no doubt. My fingers tightened around the handle of my purse. "Mrs. Peterson," Theodore greeted me with artificial warmth. "What a pleasant surprise. I didn't realize you'd be joining us today." "I live here," I said simply, allowing my voice to quaver slightly. "This is my home." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. The real estate agent, a slender woman with too much jewelry, cleared her throat nervously. "Perhaps we could continue discussing the property features," she suggested, gesturing toward the large bay windows. "As you can see, the natural light in this room is exceptional. But the damage was done." The buyers were exchanging troubled glances, their enthusiasm visibly cooling. The husband leaned over to whisper something to his wife, who nodded subtly. "Actually," the man said, his voice carefully neutral, "we have a few questions about the property status. The disclosure forms mentioned a clean title, but..." He glanced at me, then back to Mark and Rebecca. Mark stepped forward smoothly, his salesman's smile firmly in place. Of course. Perhaps we could discuss those details privately." He shot a meaningful look at Rebecca, who immediately moved toward me. "Mom," she said with forced brightness, "why don't we get you back to your trailer? You must be tired." "I'm not tired," I replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I want to know why these people are in my house. Did you invite them, Rebecca? Are they friends of yours?" Rebecca's smile became strained. "Mom, remember we talked about this? About the house being too big for us now?" I frowned, playing confused. "But James and I chose this house for the family, for you girls to grow up in, for grandchildren to visit." I turned to the potential buyers. "My husband put in all these floors himself, you know. Took him a whole summer. He had calluses for months." The woman's expression softened. "It's a beautiful home," she said gently. "You must have many wonderful memories here." "Oh yes," I nodded, warming to my role. "Like the Christmas when Rebecca was 7 and we got that big snowfall. Unusual for Fresno. James built her a snowman right there in the front yard." I pointed toward the window. "Or when Melissa broke her arm falling from that oak tree out back. We sat in the emergency room all night, and James told jokes to keep her from crying." With each memory I shared, I could see the buyer's interest in the house transforming into discomfort with the situation. They weren't heartless people. They were just a couple looking for a home, unknowingly walking into a family tragedy, orchestrated by my own daughter. Mark could see it too. His eyes hardened as he exchanged glances with Theodore, who subtly adjusted his tie, a signal of some kind. Mark nodded and stepped forward, taking my arm with firm gentleness. "Margaret," he said, his voice low but insistent, "I think you're getting overwhelmed. Let me help you back to your place." I pulled away from his grasp, my frail appearance belying the strength that indignation gave me. "Don't touch me," I said, my voice suddenly clear and sharp. "I'm not confused, Mark. Not anymore." The room went still. Rebecca froze, her practiced smile slipping. Theodore straightened, suddenly alert. "What do you mean, Mrs. Peterson?" Theodore asked cautiously. I looked directly at the potential buyers. "They took my house," I said simply. "Made me sign papers when I was grieving for my husband. Told me it was for my own good. Then they moved me to a trailer in the backyard and pretended I was losing my mind." The wife's hand went to her mouth. The husband's expression darkened. "Mom, that's not true," Rebecca said quickly, her voice rising. "You know that's not what happened. Your memory..." "My memory is fine," I interrupted, reaching into my purse. "And I have proof." Theodore stepped forward quickly. Mrs. Peterson, I don't think this is the appropriate time for... It's exactly the appropriate time, came a new voice from the doorway. Ed stood there, impressive in his charcoal suit, briefcase in hand. Before anyone makes a very serious legal mistake, the relief that washed over me at the sight of him was so intense, I nearly stumbled. Mark's face drained of color. Rebecca turned, staring at Ed with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. Mr. Simmons, Theodore said stiffly, this is a private family matter. It's a legal matter, Ed corrected, stepping into the room. One involving fraud, elder abuse, and financial exploitation. He nodded to me. Margaret, do you have the documents? With trembling fingers, genuine now, not performed, I pulled out the papers from my purse. The original contract with the missing signature, the bank notices, the loan documentation in Mark's name using the house, my house, as collateral. What is this? The potential buyer demanded, looking from Mark to Rebecca. You told us the title was clear. It is, Mark insisted, his confident facade cracking. My mother-in-law is confused. These documents are outdated. Ed smiled thinly. Actually, they're quite current. The bank received our filing yesterday morning. The property sale has been frozen pending investigation into the validity of the current deed. Rebecca turned to me, her face a mask of betrayal. Mom, what have you done? The audacity of her question made something break loose inside me, something I'd been holding back for 3 long years. The meek, confused woman I'd been pretending to be vanished, replaced by the person I truly was. A mother who had been wronged, a widow who had been betrayed, a woman who refused to be erased. What have I done? I echoed, my voice low and steady. I've remembered who I am, Rebecca. The question is, who have you become? The silence that followed was deafening. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The only sound was the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, James's favorite piece, the one thing they hadn't dared to remove or replace. Then, as if on cue, the front door opened, and Lily walked in from school, backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds in place. She stopped short at the tableau before her, the frozen adults, the tension thick enough to cut. What's going on? She asked, pulling out an earbud and looking from her parents to me with confusion. Before anyone could answer, a phone rang, Theodore's. He stepped away to answer it, his expression growing more grave with each passing second. When he returned, he looked directly at Mark and Rebecca. That was the bank, he said quietly. They've received a formal notification from the county recorder's office. The property transfer has been flagged as potentially fraudulent. Mark's face went from pale to ashen. That's impossible. We had all the paperwork. Except one signature, Ed interrupted smoothly. The required witness signature certifying that Mrs. Peterson was of sound mind and under no coercion when she supposedly agreed to transfer her home to her daughter. He turned to Theodore. As you well know, without that signature, the transfer is invalid under California elder protection statutes. The potential buyers had heard enough. The husband placed a protective arm around his wife's shoulders. I think we're done here, he said firmly. Our attorney will be in touch about the earnest money we put down. As they headed for the door, the wife paused beside me. I'm sorry, she whispered, genuine compassion in her eyes. No one should lose their home like this. When they were gone, Rebecca seemed to collapse in on herself, sinking onto the sofa. Mom, she began, her voice breaking. You don't understand. We were trying to protect you. Protect me? I repeated softly. By taking everything from me? By making me doubt my own mind? We needed the money, Mark blurted out, his cool facade finally cracking completely. My business. There were investments. We were going to pay it all back. I looked at him with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. This was never about me needing protection. It was about you needing my house. Just then, the phone in Ed's pocket rang. He answered it, listened briefly, then looked at me with a small, triumphant smile. That was my contact at Coastal Federal, he said. They've reviewed the loan documentation, the signature on the loan papers. He paused, looking directly at Mark. It doesn't match Mrs. Peterson's handwriting, not even close. The room seemed to tilt on its axis as Ed's words hung in the air. Forgery. Not just manipulation or emotional coercion, but actual criminal forgery. Mark's face drained of what little color remained, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for water. Rebecca stared at him in horror, the truth dawning on her face like a slow, painful sunrise. "Mark," she whispered, "what did you do?" He backed away, hands raised defensively. "It wasn't like that. We needed to secure the loan quickly. The papers needed your mother's signature, and she was having one of her confused days. I just helped things along." "You forged my signature?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the earthquake of emotions beneath my surface. "I did it for us," Mark insisted, looking desperately at Rebecca. "For our future. The investment opportunity was time-sensitive. If we'd waited for all the proper channels, we would have missed it." "And how did that investment work out?" Ed asked quietly, though I suspected he already knew the answer. Mark's silence was damning. Lily, who had been frozen in place since entering, suddenly found her voice. "Dad, what's happening?" The raw confusion in my granddaughter's voice broke something in me. This child, this beautiful, bright girl, who had once sat on my lap for hours listening to stories, was watching her family implode, and I was partly responsible for the devastation. Not for the crime, but for the revelation. Theodore cleared his throat, ever the professional even in the midst of chaos. "I believe we should continue this discussion with proper legal representation for all parties involved." He glanced at Mark meaningfully, particularly given the nature of the allegations. "They're not allegations," Ed replied firmly. "The bank has confirmed the forgery, and I filed a formal complaint with Adult Protective Services regarding Mrs. Peterson's treatment." At the mention of Adult Protective Services, Verna, who had been silently observing from the kitchen doorway, suddenly stepped forward. "I had nothing to do with any of this," she said quickly. "I just work here. I do what I'm told." "That's not entirely true, is it, Verna?" I said quietly. The room fell silent again, all eyes turning to me. "Show them your phone." Her face contorted with confusion, then fear. "What?" "Your phone," I repeated. "The one you use to record videos of me when I'm having confused days. The one you used to send those videos to your friends, mocking the crazy old lady you work for." Rebecca gasped. "What is she talking about?" Verna's hand went protectively to her pocket. "She's making things up. She's confused again." Ed stepped forward. "Actually, we have copies of those videos. One of Mrs. Peterson's neighbors, a former IT specialist, as it happens, was able to access your cloud storage after you used their Wi-Fi to upload particularly large files." His expression hardened. "Files that show you deliberately withholding medication, moving Mrs. Peterson's belongings to confuse her, and yes, recording her distress for your entertainment." The blood drained from Verna's face. She looked frantically at Rebecca and Mark. "They told me to keep an eye on her. They said she was dangerous to herself." "That's enough," Rebecca snapped, rising from the sofa. "You're fired, Verna. Get out of my house, now." "It's not your house," I reminded her softly. "It never legally was." Rebecca turned to me, tears finally welling in her eyes. "Mom, please. We can fix this. We made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but we can make it right." The genuine distress in her voice almost swayed me. Almost. But then I remembered the cold December morning when I'd knocked on my own front door with freshly baked cinnamon rolls, only to be directed to the servants' entrance. I remembered the isolation, the subtle gaslighting, the way they'd erased me from my own life inch by inch. "There are some things that can't be fixed with an apology," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "Trust is one of them." Mark had moved to the bar cart in the corner, pouring himself a generous measure of the expensive whiskey he loved to show off to guests. His hands shook as he brought the glass to his lips. "What happens now?" he asked, addressing Ed rather than me. "Now," Ed replied, "Mrs. Peterson reclaims her property. The fraudulent loan will be investigated by the bank's fraud department, and likely by the district attorney's office as well. As for the rest," he glanced at me, "that will be up to Margaret. I looked around the room at the home that had witnessed 40 years of my life, at the daughter who had betrayed me, at the son-in-law who had committed fraud in my name, at the granddaughter who stood bewildered in the midst of adult deception. Lily took a hesitant step toward me. "Grandma," she said, her voice small and uncertain. Did Dad really forge your signature?" The naked hurt in her eyes pierced my heart. This wasn't her fault. None of this was her fault. She had been taught to see me as I had been portrayed, a confused old woman, a burden, someone to be managed rather than loved. "Yes, sweetheart," I answered gently. "He did." She turned to her father, disbelief and betrayal written across her young face. "How could you? That's illegal." Mark couldn't meet her eyes. "It's complicated, Lily. Adult problems." "It's not complicated," she shot back, surprising us all with her vehemence. "It's wrong, and I'm not a child. I'm 16, old enough to know when someone's being treated unfairly." She moved closer to me, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "Is that why you live in that gross trailer? Because they took your house?" The simple, direct question, asked with the unvarnished honesty that only teenagers can truly master, cut through the adult prevarications like a knife. "Yes," I said simply. "That's why." Lily whirled to face her parents. "How could you do that to Grandma, after everything she did for you?" Rebecca reached for her daughter. "Lily, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Lily interrupted, pulling away from her mother's touch. "You treated Grandma like she was nothing, like she was garbage." The word hung in the air, crude but accurate. I had been discarded, set aside, treated as less than human, not by strangers, but by my own flesh and blood. I moved to the center of the room, feeling stronger than I had in years. "I want you all to listen carefully," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I'm reclaiming my home. Legally, it seems it was always mine, and I want you out." Rebecca's tears spilled over. "Mom, please, no." I cut her off, gentle but firm. "I've heard enough promises and excuses. I want you to pack your things and leave. The bank will be in touch about the fraudulent loan. That's between you and them now." Mark drained his glass. "Where are we supposed to go?" I looked at him evenly. "That's not my concern anymore." "And what about me?" Lily asked quietly. "Where am I supposed to go?" The genuine distress in her voice reached something deep inside me. Despite everything, she was still my granddaughter. Still the little girl who had once called me her star lady because I taught her the constellations on summer nights in the backyard. "That," I said softly, "will be your choice to make." I turned to Verna, who remained frozen by the kitchen door. "As for you, Rebecca was right about one thing. You're fired, and if I ever see another video of me circulating, I'll press charges for elder abuse and invasion of privacy." She nodded frantically and scurried toward the back door, eager to escape the imploding family drama. When she was gone, I looked at my watch, an old timepiece James had given me on our 25th anniversary. "I'm going back to my trailer now. I expect the house to be vacated by this time tomorrow." 24 hours? Rebecca gasped. "That's impossible." "It's more than you gave me," I reminded her. "When you moved me to the trailer, I had 3 hours to pack a lifetime." With that, I turned and walked toward the door, pausing briefly beside Lily to touch her cheek gently. "I'm sorry you had to see this, sweetheart. Truly I am." As I reached the front door of my own home, I looked back at the tableau of stunned faces. "Clean your things out properly," I said, my voice steady, despite the emotion welling in my chest, "because this is the last time you'll set foot in this house." The 68 days that followed were the strangest of my life, longer than the 3 days I spent in labor with Rebecca, longer than the week James and I waited for his final diagnosis. Time stretched and contracted in strange ways as my life transformed once again. I watched from my trailer window as they packed up their belongings, my daughter, her husband, their carefully constructed life. They worked in tense silence, loading boxes into their SUV and a rented moving truck. Lily moved between them like a ghost, helping but not speaking, her young face taut with emotions too complex for her years. They didn't leave in 24 hours as I demanded. It took 3 days. I didn't press the issue. Some battles weren't worth fighting anymore, and I took a certain satisfaction in watching them dismantle the perfect life they'd built on the foundation of my erasure. On the third evening, as dusk settled over Fresno like a lavender blanket, Rebecca knocked on my trailer door. She stood there alone, looking smaller somehow, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. "We're leaving now," she said, her voice hoarse from crying or arguing or both. I left the keys on the kitchen counter. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Mom," she began, then faltered. "I know you don't believe me, but we really did think we were doing what was best. When Dad died, you were so lost. You weren't eating, weren't sleeping. There were days you didn't recognize us. Grief isn't dementia," I said quietly. "I was mourning my husband of 45 years. She looked down at her hands. My hands really, with the same long fingers and prominent knuckles. "I know that now, but Mark convinced me. He said you needed structure, protection, that the responsibility of the house was too much." "And the loan?" I asked. "Was that for my protection too?" Her face crumpled. "I didn't know about the loan until it was too late. His business was failing. He made some bad investments. He said it was temporary, just to keep us afloat until things turned around." She wiped away a tear. "I should have questioned more, should have protected you instead of him." Part of me wanted to comfort her, the mother in me that had soothed skinned knees and broken hearts, that had celebrated triumphs and cushioned failures. But the wounded part of me, the woman who had been betrayed and discarded, held firm. "Where will you go?" I asked instead. "Melissa has room for us temporarily, until we figure things out." She hesitated. "Mark and we're not. Things aren't good between us right now." I wasn't surprised. Betrayal has a way of illuminating other cracks in a foundation. "And Lily?" Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "She wants to stay with Melissa too. She's angry with us both right now, especially Mark." "She's a smart girl," I said. "She sees clearly." Rebecca nodded, her eyes filling again. "Mom, is there any way, any chance at all that someday you might forgive me?" I looked at my daughter, truly looked at her. Behind the expensive highlights and carefully maintained appearance, I could still see echoes of the little girl who had once clung to my skirts, who had written me poems on Mother's Day, who had cried in my arms when her first boyfriend broke her heart. Somewhere beneath the woman who had betrayed me was the daughter I had raised and loved. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Some things break in ways that can't be mended." She nodded, accepting this truth with surprising grace. "I understand, but I want you to know, I am sorry, truly sorry." "I believe that you are," I said, "but being sorry doesn't undo what's been done." With nothing left to say, she turned and walked away. Her shoulders hunched against the weight of consequences finally realized. 2 weeks later, after the bank officially nullified the fraudulent transfer and restored the house to my name, I finally moved back inside. Ed helped me, along with some kind volunteers from my church, people who had missed me, who had been told I was too confused for visitors when they'd tried to check on me. The house felt both familiar and strange, like meeting an old friend who had undergone plastic surgery. My furniture was gone, replaced by modern pieces I didn't recognize. The walls had been repainted in trendy grays and whites. The garden James had lovingly tended had been landscaped into something minimalist and low maintenance. I walked through each room slowly, running my hands along surfaces, opening drawers, reacquainting myself with my own home. In what had been Lily's room, I found a photograph tucked inside the closet. Me holding her as a baby, both of us laughing at something off camera. She must have forgotten it in the hasty packing. Or perhaps she'd left it deliberately, a silent acknowledgement of what had been lost. The first night alone in the house was the hardest. I slept in the guest bedroom, unable to face the master suite where James and I had spent so many years together. The silence was oppressive after months of living in the trailer, where every creak and groan of metal had become a familiar companion. Slowly, day by day, I reclaimed my space. I sold most of the furniture Rebecca and Mark had purchased, using the money to buy pieces that felt like me, comfortable, practical, with no pretensions. I planted roses in the backyard, the old-fashioned fragrant kind that James had loved. I invited my church friends for tea, for book club, for the simple joy of filling my home with voices and laughter again. The legal consequences unfolded gradually. Mark faced charges for the forgery, reduced after he agreed to pay restitution. Rebecca lost her real estate license temporarily. The bank foreclosed on the loan, taking a portion of their savings and investments to cover the fraudulent debt. Justice, of a sort, though it brought me less satisfaction than I had expected. 1 month after they left, I received a letter from Melissa, a long, painful account of how she had believed Rebecca's version of events, how sorry she was for not checking on me herself, for accepting the narrative that I was slipping away mentally. I wrote back, our correspondence cautious but healing. Then, exactly 68 days after the confrontation that had changed everything, I found a note slipped under my front door. Simple lined paper, folded into a perfect square. Inside, in the careful handwriting of a teenager trying to appear more adult than she felt. Grandma, I miss you. Can we talk? I'm sorry for not seeing what was happening. Forgive me? Lily. Beneath her name, she'd drawn a tiny star, a reminder of the nights we'd spent in the backyard identifying constellations, when she was young enough to believe that her grandmother hung the stars in the sky just for her. I sat on my front porch for a long time that evening, the note clutched in my hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The wounds were still there, the betrayal, the loss of years I couldn't reclaim, the knowledge that my own daughter had been willing to erase me for convenience and profit. But there was Lily, young, blameless Lily, caught in the crossfire of adult failings. Did I have room in my heart for forgiveness? Not yet for Rebecca, perhaps not ever for Mark, but for my granddaughter, for the child who had been taught to look through me rather than at me. The next morning I left my front door unlocked for the first time since moving back into the house. It was a small gesture, insignificant to anyone who didn't understand its meaning, but I knew, and perhaps Lily would know, what it represented. An opening. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. Sometimes that's all we have. The possibility that what has been broken might, with time and care and honest reckoning, begin to heal. Not to what it was, never again to what it was, but to something new, something real. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but today, for the first time in years, I feel like myself again. Margaret Peterson, widow, mother, grandmother, owner of this house with its creaking floors and sun-dappled rooms. A woman who refused to be erased. A woman who remembered her own name, even when everyone else tried to forget it. As Margaret's story comes to a close, we're left to wonder, how many silent battles are being fought behind closed doors by those we've been taught to overlook? Our elderly parents and grandparents, the very people who built our foundations, are too often relegated to the corners of our lives when they should remain at the center. What would you do if faced with Margaret's betrayal? Would you find the strength to stand up for yourself when everyone around you insisted you were already forgotten? The most painful wounds are often inflicted by those closest to us, those who know exactly where we're vulnerable. But Margaret's journey reminds us that it's never too late to reclaim your voice, your dignity, and your rightful place in the world. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, but about creating space for a different kind of future, one built on truth rather than convenience. The house Margaret fought for wasn't just about property. It was about refusing to let others decide when her story was over. If this story touched your heart, please remember there are countless Margarets in our communities, elderly individuals fighting to maintain their independence and dignity in a world that too easily dismisses them. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Like and subscribe to our channel for more stories that shine light on the hidden struggles and triumphs of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Your support helps us continue telling these important stories that might otherwise remain untold.